We are going to talk about some really, really cool stuff today. I was just talking with Angelique and saying that this material is useful for a lot of purposes, not just writing emissions inventories. It's incredible what information is available from the census and then also the Energy Information Administration. So I'm just going to start then. If nobody has any questions or issues they want to bring up, we're going to talk about collecting. Now this is it. This is it, everybody. We're talking about finally using the TEISS calculators. So non-point sources are the easiest. We're going to talk about both collecting the information and entering the data into TEISS and using a calculator. So this is like the meat of TEISS. So common non-point sources, I think it's safe to say every reservation has these sources. Unless you live in the jungle, you have some sort of residential heating, but most places have some sort of heating. If you have any sort of buildings, government buildings, community centers, you're going to have some sort of commercial heating. If you have any roads at all, paved or unpaved, those are crazy. And it's not just the dust from the road. What you see when you run the calculators in TEISS and you look at the long list of emissions, you see that it's a lot of material from the tires. So in road dust, it's not just dust from the road, but it's actually the tires. When we breathe that material that comes up off of the road, we're actually breathing crunched up tires. And gas stations. And gas stations can be inventoried as non-point or point sources, especially if you've got two gas stations. It may be easier just to inventory them as non-point sources. Remember, there's a lot more information that's required for point sources in TEISS because, of course, that's what EPA needs in the National Emissions Inventory Database than for non-point sources. So these are a good place to start, and Angelique is going to demonstrate how to get some information about these sources and enter the information into TEISS and calculate the emissions and then import those emissions into your TEISS report. So you will have emissions that you have calculated now in your level 3 or 2 EI. Gathering data, local data sources are usually the most accurate. And if you have a tribal housing office and local businesses, surveys, the success with various sorts of surveys, people often send out questionnaires for example, like residential burn barrel. One tip that I'll just put in your mind now is provide some sort of incentive for finishing the survey. So, for example, if you have the opportunity, like at Earth Day or, some sort of event, to have a booth with a survey, have some giveaways, order a few pizzas, give people food, bake cookies. People do work for food. If you are not able to obtain data from local sources, there's a lot of information online. The Census Bureau has crazy specific information about people's homes, and Angelique will demonstrate that. So what we're going to start off with is residential heating. So it's the same model that you can apply for other sources, but what we're going to demonstrate is residential heating since that's such a common source. The first step is to determine what fuels are used. Because the fuels are different in TEISS and then in your emissions inventory, obviously when you burn wood or when you burn propane, or when you burn natural gas or gas, if you burn coal, it's going to emit different things. So not only the material that's used, but how it's consumed, what sort of stove is used. So again, the local tribal housing office can often provide you with really specific information. And this is where you guys have such an advantage over like a county or a state doing an emissions inventory. What fuel do you guys use? You guys know what people are doing in their homes because you've been over to their houses for dinner. So what do you use? That's a really good starting point. There is a lot of information in the census. So if your data, if you just can't find information, if you find it suspect, if you don't believe it because you know a lot of people you talk to, don't, use pellet stoves, for example, instead of wood stoves. The U.S. Census Bureau has a lot of really good specific information, even down to the tribal level. Angelique is going to show you the Census Bureau Fact Finder. First, she's going to start off with the next few slides that show you like the main points of the website.
Picking up where Melinda left off, we are going to talk about how to use the Census Bureau online application to find data on home heating fuel use. So, in the opening screen of the U.S. Census Bureau site application, you'll see that there's a little search box. And what you want to do is you want to type in the words house heat in the search box. And then that's going to bring up a list. And the one you want to select in the list is the one that starts with B25040, and that's the house heating fuel report. So you want to click on that, and when you do that, that opens up this screen that shows you data on house heating fuel. So what it shows you is the number of houses that heat with each of the fuel types. So what you'll notice here is you want to look at the product. And the reason you want to look at the product that I've circled here is that you want to make a note in your logbook what the year of the product is. And in this particular example, you'll see it's 2018. You see right here, the product is 2018 ACS 1-year estimate detail tables. And you want to note that in your logbook because that's something you want to include in the text of your emissions inventory. There might be a discrepancy between the year of your inventory. So let's say I'm doing an inventory for the 2019 inventory year, and I'm using 2018 data. That's okay because remember that an emissions inventory is the best available estimate. It's just that if there is that difference in the year, you just need to note that in the text of your emissions inventory so that you're telling your audience what year the data is from. Another thing to note here is that when the table first opens, it shows data for the entire United States. And that's because we haven't specified any geographies yet. So you want to look at data specifically for your tribe. So we need to specify your tribe as the geography. So how do we do that? We first click on the geographies icon, and that's shown right here. It says geographies. And when you click on that, you get this list here. And what you want to do is you want to use the vertical scroll bar that's to the right here. And you want to scroll down until you get to the American Indian area, Alaska Native area, Hawaiian homeland selection. And then you want to click on it. And when you do that, it opens up this little table to the right, and it gives you a list of tribes. Now, when you first open this list, it doesn't show all the tribes. So there's a good chance that your tribe might not be listed here. And if that's the case, what you want to do is you want to click on that magnifying glass icon here. And then what that does is it allows you to type in your tribe name right here. And then you can search for your tribe. And then it should show up in this list here. Once you've got your tribe showing up in that list, you want to select your tribe by marking the checkbox next to it. And once that's all done, what you need to do is you need to click on close. And that's going to close up this little subtable. And now look at the difference. So now we have data that's specific for the tribe instead of the entire United States. So What this shows us is, in this particular example, there's a total of 2,856 occupied houses, and then it shows us how many houses heat with each of the different fuel types. So this table can give you kind of an idea of what the majority of the population that's on your reservation uses for heating their households. And this is a good way to determine what sources you want to include for residential heating. So it might be that you don't want to include every single source for residential heating, or perhaps you just can't get enough time to do every single source. So you want to just focus on the sources that are used by the most people. So in this particular example, the ones that I would include in my emissions inventory is utility gas, and that includes natural gas. And I would also include bottled tank or LP gas, and that's the LPG. LPG includes propane and butane. And then there's fuel oil, I'd include that too, and wood. As you can see here, there's no coal use in this particular example. There's a significant amount of electricity use, but the reason we don't include that is because electricity use, you're going to get the emissions at the power plant level and not the household level. So you wouldn't include emissions from electricity that you use at your house in your emissions inventory. There's also this other fuel category here, and we can't know what is included in that category, so we can't use that in our emissions inventory. So that's kind of a basic rundown of how you would get data on house heating fuel from the U.S. Census Bureau application online. And I'm going to demonstrate that in more detail in video 12B. But for now, we're going to continue on with the rest of the slides. So now we're going to talk about step 2 of how you would collect data for residential heating. So step 2 is to look at the TEISS calculators to determine what data you need to collect. You might have already done this because it was part of a homework exercise in one of the earlier modules, but it's important to know what data you're going to need to collect. So at a minimum, each heating source requires you to know how much of fuel is used reservation-wide for the inventory year. Remember, always, always, always check the units asked for in the calculator so you know what data you need to enter the units in. One really helpful thing about the calculators is the print blank option, and I'm going to demonstrate that because it's just so cool. The print blank option is really useful to take out a printed copy into the field if you'll be collecting data in the field, or if you are collecting data via phone calls, it's really cool to have this sheet you can just enter the data on while you're on the phone with the person. So I'm going to show you that because I just really like it. So I'm going to get into TEISS. So I don't have a project open right now, but I'm going to go into Tools and look at emission calculators. And I'm going to look at the emission calculator for a gas station. So if I click on the estimator button, you can go into File, and then you go Print Blank. And then it opens up a screen where it wants you to specify the printer. Right now, my default printer is a document writer printer, so that's going to make a copy of it on my computer. If you want to print it out to take in the field, of course, you would change that to a physical printer. So I'm going to click OK just to show you what comes up when I print this out. So it's going to say, where do you want to save this? Because like I said, it's on a document writer printer. So let's find a folder to save it in. And I'm just going to say this is gas station gas station 1, and it'll say save. Now let's close this out and let's take a look at what that printed. So this is the printout you would have. So if you have multiple gas stations, I would say, okay, have one of these for each gas station. And then you could go, while you're talking to the gas station person, you could say, okay, what kind of tank filling do you do? Do you submerge fill, splash fill, or do you do balanced submerge filling? And they would say, oh, we do splash filling. So then you could circle that on this form, and then you could say, okay, do you have any controls for vehicle refueling? And they say, I don't think so, we don't. So you would circle uncontrolled. And vehicle spillage, I think that's pretty much at every gas station, so you can go ahead and circle that and not even talk to the person about that. And then the fuel throughput, they tell you, well, we sell 2,000 gallons a year. So you could write in 2,000 gallons. At this point, you might want to just not worry about the units and just write down what units they give you instead of asking them to convert. It's better just to let them tell you what they have, because you can't go through and document their conversion. So it's better for you to do the conversion than ask them to do the conversion, because you can't document and check their conversion. So that is the print blank option. Okay, so if it's not clear on what to enter into the field in the TEISS calculator, make sure you check the source documents reference on the opening screen of the calculator. I like to read through the entire thing, but I'm weird that way, and I know you guys are, have not a lot of time to do this in. So it's good if you can, but if you can't, if there's anything you don't understand on what the TEISS calculator is asking you for, then go into the documentations and read about it. If you still don't understand what it's asking you for, let me know, and I can help you understand what it's asking for. So step 3 is to determine the quantity of each fuel used reservation-wide. So there's some options, and again, we always recommend that you use local source options before you use internet options, because they're going to be the more reliable options. It's going to be more reliable to look at data that comes from a local source than looking at data perhaps from a national source. You can check with the tribal housing office. They might know, for example, how many houses use wood stoves and how much each house uses. Another option is the local fuel suppliers, so the natural gas company that supplies the natural gas for the reservation. You might contact them and say, okay, in 2016, how much natural gas did you sell to reservation homes? And they might be able to give you a number. Another option is conducting a survey. So you might go through and survey a few houses and get an average response. So like say there's 50 houses on the reservation, maybe you want to survey 20% of those houses. So you survey 10 of the houses and try to get a representative sample. If you do that, try to do let's see, an apartment like that would use a small amount of fuel, and then maybe a mansion that uses a huge amount of fuel, and get the average value and use that as the value that you want to use, because remember, an emissions inventory is the best available estimate. If you can't get data from local sources, there is a national source option, and that's the Energy Information Administration data. And we're going to talk about that in the next couple slides. EIA data, when you first go to that link that was in the previous slide, that link is also in the notes document, by the way. It will open up this screen, and it has these tables. So it has tables on fuel consumption and fuel expenditures. The tables you want to use are the fuel consumption tables. Don't use the fuel expenditures tables. That's a different thing, and you don't want to use that. So it gives averages by different regions. So there's the Northeast region, the Midwest region, South region, and the West region. So you would just click on the XLS, which is the Excel file, to open that up. So if your reservation was in, so let's say it's in Idaho, you would click on Total Averages West Homes and click on that Excel link to open up the spreadsheet. So this is the spreadsheet that opens up. It looks kind of intimidating at first, but just give it some time to sink in. What you want to do here is that on the bottom of the screen, you'll see the different tabs in the worksheet. The one by default that it goes to is BTU. You don't want that one. You want the physical units tab. So you click on the physical units, and that shows you the numbers per household, and it tells you the units of each of these numbers. So you'll see that it's divided up by different areas. So you can get numbers based on where the reservation is located, based on urban and rural, based on the metropolitan statistical area, based on the climate region. I like to use, first and foremost, I like to use the location. It just makes the most sense to me. Climate region is also, could be useful. So just look at these numbers and see if they make sense to you. Use the number that makes the most sense to you. So if you look at the number for California and it's just not something that you think is happening, like 358 gallons of LPG used per year, that just doesn't make sense to me. Perhaps you want to use the climate region instead. The most current data is 2015 for this. So again, that's why we say that local data is always more accurate than data that you find online, because of these things, like the amount of time that it takes to get the data online. So you're going to be using older data. But again, if it's the only data you have, then we just have to go with it. So what we're going to go through now is 3 scenarios. And we're going to focus on residential heating, and we're going to use 3 examples of collecting data. So this first example we're going to look at is natural gas with mostly local data. So in this example, the person called their local natural gas company and they asked these questions, and they found out what to ask by looking at the TEISS calculator for what's required. So they called their local gas company and they said, okay, for this particular example, they're doing a 2011 inventory. So they said in 2011, how much gas was sold to reservation households? And the person on the phone says 900,000 cubic feet of gas. And again, let them give you the units that they have. Don't try to make them convert. It can be very confusing for them, and you can't document their unit conversions. You do the conversions, and then you can document it, and you can have someone check it. Then you ask them, what is the heating value of the gas you sell? And they say 980. What is wrong with this? I think you all know. There is no units here. So if they give you a value without any units, it's meaningless. So you do need to ask them to specify that. You say, can you specify those units? And they say, oh yeah, sure. It's BTUs per cubic foot. And then there's one more question that you need to know is, what is the sulfur content of the gas you sell? And they say, I don't know. So, I mean, sometimes you can't get all of the information you need. On sulfur content and heat content, usually you can find default values online for those. If you can't get them, usually you can use the defaults. So what we're going to do now is look at how the information you collected is entered into the TEISS calculator. Units for natural gas and propane need a little bit of explanation. So there's different lingo that's used for natural gas and propane. And a lot of times you'll see this M notation. So if you get an email back from someone and they say, we use 1 MFT3, what does that mean? 1 M means thousands of cubic feet. And that's from the old Roman numeral M for 1,000. You might get a little confused with that and think it means million. It doesn't. It actually means 1,000 of cubic feet. If there's 2 M's, so that means 1,000 cubic feet, that's when it means 1,000,000 cubic feet. So some TEISS calculators ask for the throughput in MMFT3. So if you get the value in MMFT3, you can enter that into the panel. If you get the throughput as 800 MFT3s, then you would have to divide by 1,000 to get the number of million cubic feet, or MMFT3s. I know this is really confusing, but If you ever have any doubts, just let us know and we can look at your conversions and give you some support on converting, because I know it's very confusing. Going back to the slide right before this is, okay, so you got this information from the natural gas company, and now you're going to enter it into TEISS. So this goes through the steps of entering that data into TEISS. So the units, you want U.S. standard pounds emissions, so you leave that default. The combustor type, so you want to select a combustor type of residential furnaces, because we're talking about housing. So you want to select the combustor type of residential furnaces from the drop-down list. Then you remember you converted 900,000 cubic feet to million cubic feet. Note here million cubic feet. So you got 0.9 entered into your TEISS calculator, and you entered the heating value that they gave you of 980 BTUs per cubic feet. Emission controls, usually for residential homes, these are like for big industrial boilers. You're not going to have any of these emission controls, so there's nothing selected here. Sulfur content, again, they didn't know what the sulfur content was, and note that if it's unknown, TEISS tells you what it's going to use. So if you want to confirm that value online, whatever, TEISS tells you I'm using 2,000 grains per million cubic feet because you don't know what it is. So that's the first example. The second example is for wood stoves, where the person had some local data, and for other, they use the online option. So for their local data, what they did was they went out and surveyed 100 households on how much wood is burned annually per household, and they got back 50 responses, which is pretty high. Usually you don't get that much back when you do surveys. Then they entered the responses into a spreadsheet to calculate annual average wood consumption per household. So for those 50 households, they had 50 different values, or perhaps some of them were the same, but what they used was a spreadsheet to calculate the average. If you're going to be calculating averages or anything like that, it's really a good idea to use a spreadsheet because you can document it and put it in your little online file, and someone else can also look at it and check it. Whereas if you just wrote everything down into a notebook, it'd be hard. Plus, who wants to pick up their calculator and enter 50 values in and get the average? It's way easier to do it in a spreadsheet. If you have any issues with using spreadsheets, Melinda's really good with Excel. I am sort of good with Excel, so we can help you with using spreadsheets. For the data that wasn't local, they used the house heating fuel table from the U.S. Census. So they went through FactFinder, and they used the value of 900 houses on the reservations that heat with wood. So then what they did was they calculated the reservation-wide annual wood consumption for residential heating. So remember, the average household that uses 1.2 cords per year. So you need to multiply that by the number of households on the reservation with wood stoves to get a total of 1,080 cords. Now we will look at how that information is entered into the TEISS calculator. So on this particular example, you want to change the units because you have data in cords. So you need to select units of U.S. cords or pound emissions. And then you need to select the stove type. So in this particular example, they selected a stove type of catalytic phase 2 based on a discussion with the housing office. So they went to the housing office and they said, do you know what kind of wood stoves people are using these days? And the housing office says, well, we had this incentive program for people to switch out their old wood stoves for new wood stoves, and most people did it. And those wood stoves were phase 2. And if you look in the comments here, what is a phase 2 wood stove? That's a stove certified to 1990 EPA emission standards. So that's what they used. And then they selected the wood type based on local knowledge. So for this particular tribe, it's located in the Rocky Mountain and Pacific Coast region, and the forest type or the wood type that's most commonly used is fir and spruce, and it's a hardwood. And then they enter the amount of fuel burned of 1,080 cords. The next example is LPG, and they didn't have any local data, so they just couldn't collect the data. So that what they did is they went to the Census Bureau and the EIA, and they just used the data from there because that's the best available estimate they could get. So the house heating fuel table from the U.S. Census reports that 335 households on the reservation heat with LPG. And for the EI data, I'd like to show you something. So for this example, the reservation is located in Idaho. So let's look at Idaho in the EIA data. Right now, this is a live EIA demonstration. So let's say, okay, this was in Idaho. So we're looking at West Homes. We're going to click on this Excel file, and we're going to say, yeah, we want to open with Excel. So click OK. Now let's take a look at it. So for Idaho, if I was just to use where it's located, and oh, I need to go to physical units. Why didn't anyone tell me? Remember, check on physical units first. Okay, Idaho, and we're looking at LPG. We've got a Q value. So what that means is that the data was withheld for some reason. So obviously we can't use that value because there is no value. So we're not going to be able to use where the reservation is located. So let's take a look at climate region. I know that Idaho is in the very cold region. I'm going to, once I get out of here, I'll show you where to find the map on, if you don't know what climate region you're in, I'll show you where to find that map on the EIA site. But let's take a look at the LPG value for the very cold region. So 604. So that's the value to use because I couldn't find the value for the area it was located in. So 604 gallons per household of LPG. So back in the residential energy consumption site, if you scroll up here, you'll see this REX map. If you click on that link, you'll see a map. If you scroll down, what the map you want to use is the REX 2009 map. You can see the different climate regions on this map. So like I said, Idaho is located in cold, very cold, and they have the different regions by color on this map. So let's go back into presentation. So I explained this, that the Q was reported for Idaho, so we had to use the value for the climate region of 604 gallons per household. And then you have to calculate it out based on the total usage per year. So we had 335 houses and 604 gallons per household gives a total of 202,340 gallons. So let's see how to enter this information into the TEISS calculator. Units, again, you want to use U.S. standard pound emissions. LPG type, it's either propane or butane, I believe, and based on local knowledge, I know that most houses use propane. So I select propane there. And the process is going to be a residential use instead of a commercial or industrial use. So I select residential from the drop-down. Remember, I had to do a conversion here. So I had 202,340 divided by 1,000 equals 202.34 thousand gallons. And I don't know the sulfur content, so I left that unknown. And again, TEISS shows you what it's going to use if you leave unknown selected. And those are the 3 examples I wanted to show you. Now we're going to talk about some internet data for other sources. As always, local data is usually more accurate, so we recommend using local data as much as you can. So for the common sources on the reservation, I went through and listed out some common internet sources you can use if you can't find local data. These are not quite as accurate as the residential heating sources, but they're still out there. And if, like I said, a rough estimate is better than no estimate. So the Energy Information Administration, besides having data on residential heating, they also have some limited amount of data on commercial heating. And I included the link for that. The most current data is 2012 data. What this data includes for some fuel types is an energy intensity data. So it has the average gallons used per square footage. So if you happen to know the square footage of the building, or if you can go out and ask someone what is the square footage of that building, you can get an estimate on how much fuel they used based on this value from the EIA. Road dust. So for road dust, you're going to need a vehicle's miles traveled value or a VMT value. And to get that value, what you have to do is you have to multiply the daily traffic by 365 days per year to get into annual, and multiply that by road length. The BIA has some data on VMT on the Indian Reservation Roads program, and there's the link for that. And for other roads that you might have, you can check the State Department of Transportation or the DMV websites for traffic count data. They might not have data for the reservation road, but they might have data for a similar road that you could use as a surrogate. And just remember that traffic counts are usually reported as average daily counts, and to get them to annual, you do need to multiply by 365. And then to get the road links, it's relatively easy to use internet maps to get road links for VMT calculations. Gas stations, this one is really a very, very rough estimation method, but the EIA also has data on gasoline sales volumes, but it's all by state. So you're going to select the state of interest, then you're going to get an annual 1,000 gallons per day, and you're going to need to multiply that by 365 days a year to get the annual value. And remember, this is by state, so you're going to need to do a scaling down approach to get it to the reservation level, such you might want to use an allocation such as population. But again, this is a really rough estimation method, and it is probably more likely that you're going to be able to get data from a gas station. But if you can't, this is an estimation method that's out there. I'm going to talk about the homework first and then go into the demonstration of how to do the homework. So the homework is for the TEISS project that you started for your reservation during EI Fundamentals. So you want to go back to the project you started in EI Fundamentals, because what you're going to be doing is adding sources to it that are specific to your reservation. So you definitely want to use that project. So you're going to be entering the year that you plan on collecting data for. So you're going to be starting a new inventory year in that TEISS project. And then you're going to go out and collect data for one of the sources, one of the non-point sources in your list of sources. So remember, there was a homework exercise for one of the earlier modules on what kind of non-point sources are out there that you want to include in your inventory. So you're going to look at that list and pick one of the sources, and then you're going to go out and collect data on that source. If you can't collect local data on that source, you can use data from the internet sources that we referenced. And remember, if you do collect internet data right now, you can always update it later if for some reason local data is available down the road. And then you're going to enter that source into the new inventory year in your TEISS project. And you're going to use the TEISS calculator to estimate emissions for that source. And then what we want you to do is this is email, but we prefer that you put it on the website. So put it on the training site, post it to the training site, a TEISS report that shows the data entered. So we're going to go through a demonstration of doing all that.